Ronan Schneeman here from Fraudbeat, back with Chen Zamir of Sardine and Native Risk. We're going to continue this where we left it off with the previous interview with Chen on the layer cake approach to fraud prevention. And we're going to address something that we barely touched on in the last interview, which is how AI and LLMs are impacting fraud prevention in the industry. Chen, take it away.
Thank you. And thank you also for inviting me for another guest appearance, Ronan. So where we left off last time was when we were discussing what I call the fraud stack layer cake, which is basically how we, as fraud fighters or fraud strategists, how we layer machine learning models, rules, and manual reviews all together to get the best, most optimized results. And we discussed it a bit that each of these methods have pros and cons, and only by layering these different approaches together, you can basically, let's say, get a performance or a stack that can kind of like cover for each of these different weaknesses. And the question that I get a lot is, of course, nowadays in the last 2 years or so, what about AI? Is AI the silver bullet that will replace this 3-layer cake? Is AI going to transform this layer cake into a 4-layer cake? And I think a lot of, let's say, the ideas around how AI should manifest in a modern fraud stack are, in my mind, rooted in a few misconceptions. And I think what we're trying to do with AI is more of the same, or maybe better, try to be better. And this can be maybe in accuracy when it comes to models, for example, or this can be in efficiency when it comes to manual review. So maybe you do it with AI. But I think of course, AI can contribute to accuracy and efficiency, right? But I don't think that this is the real thing or the real change, the real step change that AI represents for us. And to maybe explain what I mean by that and why I think like that, I'd like to take a step back and about a concept that I think I am talking about for about a decade now, and that is that, and this is a trivial point, and we all know that every fraud defense that we deploy starts rotting the second we deploy it. And by rotting, what I mean is that the performance starts to degrade, whether this is a model, whether this is a new rule, or whether this is a new investigation playbook.
Sorry, but in plain English, by degrading, you mean the fraudsters start to figure it out, essentially, and the value declines.
Exactly. And the point here is that this happens to every, let's say when we're speaking about real-time defenses, rules, and machine learning models, this happens to every piece of code that you deploy, because it's not only about fraudsters. It's about how your customers behave. It's about how your business looks like, where you operate, what kind of products you have, and so on. So when you deploy something, it is perfect or maybe close to perfect at that point in time, but it degrades. And this is for general software purposes. As you mentioned, for fraud prevention, we also have an adversary that is actively trying to bypass our defenses. So the fact that performance starts to degrade immediately, and whether it takes a long time to degrade or less so, that's a different question, but it degrades. That is not, I want to believe, a new concept. And I want to believe that everyone that is listening right now will not be surprised by that. But to me, what it means is that what's really important is not how accurate your rules were or your models were when you first deployed them. Because what matters is how accurate they are right now, or how performant are they right now. And we also understand that the closer they are, the closer they are to the point of being released, the better performance we would have. So as time ticks by from the release, we'll have worse results. What do we get from that? We want to deploy as frequently as possible. We want to monitor our rules all the time. We want to tweak our rules all the time. We want to develop and release new rules all the time. Same goes to machine learning models. And to an extent, same goes to our manual review playbooks. We want to learn all the time from what's happening, both on the fraud side and also within our system, to be able to tweak our defenses and make sure that they are fresh or as fresh as they can be all the time. And this concept is the concept of learning cycles, or how I call it, the reaction cycle. How fast from a moment where I see that there's like a performance issue, how fast can I correct it? How fast can I fix it? And when I say performance issues, that doesn't necessarily mean a fraud attack. We keep thinking about us stopping losses and fraudsters trying to outsmart us and so on. But we all know it. It can also be that suddenly we have a data issue that is really skewing one of our models. Or it might be that we've released a rule or whatever happened, something happened in our system, and suddenly a rule starts to create a lot of false positives, or we have a lot of timeouts. So there can be a lot of different incidents that can happen in our system that don't necessarily mean that we're under a fraud attack. And we still want to realize it straight away. We want to understand what's going on there straight away, and we want to fix it straight away. In this reaction cycle, the faster we can run one, the faster we can react, the better our system would be because it would be fresher. That's basically the concept. What's the reaction cycle? I won't get too deep into it, but let's quickly cover it. We have two phases, learning and acting. Learning phase, we have one, we want to be notified, we want to be alerted that something is up. Two, we want to assess the scope of it and like make sure that this is indeed big enough and requires our attention, prioritization, resources, and so on. And three, what is the root cause? What actually happened? What is the problem? This is learning. Then we go into the acting phase. In acting, we start with researching a solution, testing the solution, and six, bring my other hand. If you're watching, six is deploying the solution. So we need to go through these 6 stages of the reaction cycle, and we want to do that as fast as possible. And we also want to have as many such cycles running in parallel. If we have such a machine and this machine can churn these issues, churn these incidents as fast as possible, then the secondary effect, the byproduct, is that we are more accurate. We have fresh, up-to-date defenses. And so the point here is not necessarily to have our North Star to be accuracy, but have our North Star to be speed. We want to be fast in what we do. And fast and speed isn't about how many milliseconds it takes a rule or a model to execute. Speed is not how much it takes an investigator, how many minutes it takes him or her to review a case. Speed is how much time it takes us to basically change the autopilot, change the rule, change the model, change the playbook. This is the speed I'm talking about. And at this point, we go back to AI. In my mind, the point with AI, especially with agentic AI, is that now all of these processes that I just described, this reaction cycle, which always happen manually. Also, when we're talking about data science and analytics, it always happens manually. Now we can delegate some of these parts, and maybe even most of these parts, most of these phases in the reaction cycle, to AI agents to do for us, or at least with us. And this is how I see AI's role in a modern fraud stack.
That's very interesting. Before we go deeper on that, why do you think the conversations until now have been focused mostly on accuracy and not on speed?
I think it's just emotion. It's just inertia, right? I think that we have these spectacles that we wear where we have been chasing for almost 2 decades better models with better AUC or better, like false positive rate, whatever KPI that we want to optimize here. And I think a lot of folks are thinking, okay, can we train a foundation model using payment or whatever fraud data instead of text or images and create a model that would use AI algorithms instead of machine learning algorithms to have better performance with like in our scoring. And this thinking is kind of like more of the same. But I do think that we're not at a place where we are searching for a faster horse. This is the step change where we're starting to think about an engine instead of horses. And this is why I think the real key here, the real enabling function is actually going to be AI agents and agentic workflows rather than foundation models themselves.
Got you. Okay. So where do we go from here? So you have agentic. We have agents helping us speed up the reaction cycles. And then what?
Yeah. So supposedly, I just described 6 phases of the reaction cycle, and we also just talked about the fact that this can be applied to rules, this can be applied to investigations, this can be applied to machine learning models. There's a lot here. So where do we start? And I think I'll in the time that we have today, I want to highlight 2 points in our current kind of like fraud ops environment where I think AI agents can unlock a lot of value. But before I'd like to talk about these 2 elements, I'll just acknowledge the fact that I do think that today I do see already teams and definitely vendors starting to implement AI vendors around investigations. This can be fraud investigations, compliance, AML investigations. But the point here is that a lot of AI agents today, how they are used in fraud, is by helping investigators, analysts, agents to basically, one, enrich their cases, basically pull the right data from the right vendor. B, conduct OSINT investigations and pull like additional data instead of the analyst. So this enrichment side. Secondly, structure. Basically structuring the investigation in a way that can later, for example, be used to file a SAR more easily, or that can be consumed by your system for whatever labeling more easily, for consistency and standardization. So structure. And thirdly, agents are used for recommendations, right? So this is what we've seen. This is the narrative that we have around this case. This is the recommendation. And you, as the investigator, you're in a position where you can review everything and decide whether you agree or not. This is already being done today to an extent. And I think even if your team is not doing it today, you are probably going to at least experiment with it in the next 12 months. So this is, from my perspective, already a phase we're in, and I don't think that we need to talk about it too much. Instead, I want to talk about 2 other things. The first thing that I'd like to talk about is how to really unlock the potential of investigations. And here, instead of thinking, how can I make an investigation last 5 minutes instead of 20 minutes by doing everything that we just described, what we need to think about instead is how can I make sure that with one ruling, we can actually decide on multiple cases. And the point here is that fraud is never an isolated event. Fraudsters are never one-timers. They are not one-hit wonders. Fraudsters and campaigns, when they attack you, they often come with multiple attempts and multiple cases. And it is very, very common to see campaigns of thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of accounts or payments or identities that are involved in a single campaign. And as an investigator, as an agent, you don't necessarily see it. You basically just see whatever is in front of you in the queue and is being kind of like pushed into your screen. But many times as analysts that review the data in the data warehouse, you can find these patterns, you can find these campaigns very easily. And the first thing that I think that AI agents can do is exactly be able to take these single individual alerts and bunch them together as cases. This is something that is being done to an extent today automatically in some organizations, and many times it is done manually by the investigators themselves. But there's so much room here for agents to basically, for every alert, every kind of like event that is flagged, match it against known campaigns and known patterns that we know that are currently active, and associate them to this campaign. And by doing that, you get basically two things. First of all, especially with fraud, by the way, it is way easier to make a decision. When I have 1,000 cases that are bunched together, it doesn't matter if they are good or not. And usually if they are bunched together, they are not good. It's way easier for me to see the pattern, to see the fraud indicators, and to decide that this is something bad. It's much easier than looking at each case individually. So I just made redundant all of these hundreds or thousands of other events that are sitting in my queue, and I can auto-resolve them. I don't need to go over them again because I looked at the ring and I resolved it. And so we gain the leverage twice here, right? Both from an accuracy perspective and also the time that it takes us to make the decision, but also the fact that we are making a resolution over multiple cases. But the real leverage that we get here is by being able to label cases or label events at scale. So if now, or if in the old world, quote unquote, we would have reviewed a specific event and decided this is fraud, and now it is labeled as fraud, and hopefully it would now be treated as such in our database, and we can train our models and write rules according to it. Now, with this single decision, with these 5 minutes that I spend, I can tag thousands of cases as fraud. And this ability to make decisions at scale, that's the unlock, right? That means that I don't necessarily now need to spend so much effort to find the needle in the haystack, fraud, which is usually a minuscule population in my flow. I don't need to do that anymore in order to be able to understand what's going on and how my defenses are performing and what should I do to fix them. So
You're calling that the unlock, or I guess you could say the prerequisite for the new world, so to speak.
Exactly. This is the prerequisite. It's exactly that. Another method that can help us gain this prerequisite to the new world, which is the second element that I mentioned, and that is to start labeling with agents. And what do I mean by that? We already have agents reviewing each and every case, and now these cases are made by multiple events, so it's also easier to make decisions on them. And we already have these agents recommending a decision. So the difference between recommending a decision and labeling is pretty low, right? The difference is semantics, basically. Now you might ask, why do you need a human to govern an AI agent? Now you might ask, how come I'm not that comfortable with giving agents the permission to rule over investigations, but I am comfortable letting them label events? If it's same, why am I making these differentiated governance models? I think the simple answer is that in investigations, I am actually making a ruling, like a real ruling over a real user. And if I'm making a mistake, I'm creating friction. With labels, I don't really do that. So, I mean, there are, of course, downsides to having bad labels. And the downside is that, my simulations and in general, my reporting, everything is less accurate. But I'm not necessarily putting myself into a hole with the user and maybe even with the regulators if I do that on scale. And I would also say that, we know that labels as a default are always dirty, especially when it comes to fraud. There can be many reasons why events that are not tagged as fraud can be fraud, and we don't know about it. Under-reporting, 3D secure coverage that, means that we don't necessarily get a charge. But there can be a lot of reasons. And there can also be a lot of reasons why events that are tagged as fraud are not really fraud. For example, first-party fraud or chargeback fraud, right? I say that it was an unauthorized use, but actually it was me, but it's tagged as fraud because I got a chargeback. So labels are not accurate by default, and of course, agents can can introduce more issues around that, but we know how to deal with that. We know how to create different sets of labels. We know how to measure their cleanliness. So there are ways to deal with it. The point here is that once I can label with agents, I can now basically run an agent for literally every event that runs through my system. It doesn't need to happen within the same second. It doesn't need to happen within the same minute, but I have all the time in the world. And instead of waiting for chargebacks that can arrive in 30, 60 days, now I can have labels from the same day. Actually, what it means is that when we are thinking about AI and agentic AI, we see that we have two ways for us to gain labels at scale and very fast, whether it is through scaling the decisions from investigations or whether it is really to use AI agents themselves to label my events. The point here is that we are not waiting for the chargebacks. And if we go back to the idea of reaction cycle, what we see here is that if for reaction cycles that depend on us knowing the fraud rates and how fraud matures and which events were fraudulent and which ones were false positives, suddenly the reaction time here compresses significantly because we don't need to wait these 30 to 60 days. We now have on-demand labels. And that means that not only
Yeah,
that
it's a
we
huge
can now
difference.
start building, yeah, and that means that not only that we can start building the next steps in the reaction cycles, the logics themselves, and start training them and so on, but it already shortens the reaction cycle by a lot. Probably it shortens the stage, takes the most amount of time, just sitting on your hands and waiting to see what was fraud 2 months ago. And that, I think, would be the step change with AI.
Got you. So that's sort of like a game changer in your opinion. But let me ask you this. I mean, you're saying you don't want to use agentic AI for decision making regarding the results of investigations. You know, whether you approve the customer, you don't approve the customer. What would need to change for you to be okay with that? You said you're afraid of the customer insult and so on.
Yeah. So there are a few elements here. I'll start by saying that I do think that eventually we will get there, and I don't necessarily object to it from, from a theoretical perspective. I think a few things need to happen first. One, I think that teams would need to get comfortable with operating AI agents at scale, and that means trust, but trust comes with experience. So and experience comes with time. So A, we just need some time. B, there's also an element of knowing how to monitor AI agents, how to assess AI agents, and how to correct AI agents. And so it's not enough for us to kind of like say this agent, we have enough experience with it and we know, how good it is or not. But it is also, okay, and then what do you do with it? How do you actually measure it? So I think there's this AI agent performance monitoring framework that teams would need to start putting in place. Is a prerequisite for doing things in real time, or not even in real time, doing things fully automated, like running things fully automated. And if you think about it, this is what we have today for rules. This is what we have today for machine learning models. We have these frameworks around which we can say, okay, well, this is my system's health, and these are the pain points, and this is where I need to go and have a closer look, and so on. So the same thing we would need to develop for AI agents themselves. This is not going to be obviously a 0 to 1 journey. It's not going to be that one day we'll have it and then we'll move from fully manual or fully manual in the human in the loop, to fully automated. I think that we will, or teams would recognize that certain flows, certain decisions are probably easier for agents to conduct with higher accuracy. And this would be part of gaining the experience of slowly like moving bigger and bigger chunks of flows or populations or queues to be completely resolved with agents. This is really just a matter of time in my mind. There is another question, which is the regulator. I think it is maybe a bit more relevant for compliance and AML investigations rather than fraud, because also here you need some kind of like auditability and so on, explainability and so on. But I think this is more about understanding how this should look like rather than a real technological challenge. It's not that I'm saying that AI agents shouldn't be ever used for making automated decisions. I just think that most teams are not there, and this is just a process. And I would say that regardless, we will forever have a human in the loop. It would just not be on a single event decision. It would be, as we are today monitoring rules and monitoring machine learning models, we will always have a human in the loop, even if it's just sitting, monitoring, and deciding when to tweak or when to deprecate or when to retrain.
Got you. That's interesting also. Okay. So we'll always have a human in the loop, but you think that we will get to a point where we have agentic decision making. It's just a matter of time.
Exactly.
Essentially.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. We're about to run out of time, but is there anything else you want to say in terms of reaction time and that being sort of the game changer that agentic AI brings to the world of fraud prevention right now?
Yeah, I'll say in general, obviously, in order to fully automate the reaction cycle, there are a few more things that teams would need to put into place. But what we talked about today is the prerequisites for that, for like automated rule writing, for example, right? But more than that, these are the prerequisites. It is probably also the sensible place to start with. It's where we already have technology in place. We already have, as I mentioned, agentic products around investigations. So most teams have already today, or will have very shortly, some experience with that, and starting to expand the capabilities and starting to expand how we think about it. It's not about how accurate we make decisions on single events. It is not how many headcount we save. It is about how fast can we react and what these capabilities can help us achieve further upstream or downstream, actually. When you start with, when you start where you already have some experience and some technology and you start working your way up from there, that would lead you naturally to other more complex things that can be done. And we can talk about it next time, what these are.
That's the conclusion. Okay, so very interesting takeaways from Chen Zamir. Chen Zamir of Sardine and Native Risk, thank you for being on Fraudbeat. This is Ronen Schnidman, and that's a wrap.